All right. All right, so welcome everyone to the Road to Grad Slam. So this year, we are trying to get a real head start on helping people prepare to compete their best in the Grad Slam competition that doesn't actually start the competitive aspect of it until mid-February. And so what I want to do today is kind of break down how we envision people getting prepared to compete in the competition, as well as highlight some of the benefits of going through that preparation, whether or not you ultimately decide to enter the competition formally. And so Grad Slam broadly is an annual contest to communicate research. There's cash prizes attached to it. That tends to be the highest profile aspect of it. And it aims to make your research accessible to the general public. I like to think of it as making your research accessible to as many audiences as possible. So for different people, this means very different things. Sometimes it means working in an area that you hope influences policy at some point. So you want policymakers who aren't well versed in your work to understand it. Sometimes it means getting your work to people sooner. My own background's in philosophy, and I would love if some of what I worked on was taught in middle and high schools rather than purely at the college level. So finding ways to make that accessible to a younger audience. Sometimes it means having something to talk about on Thanksgiving with your family who works in a completely different field, and you just want to, think more about how to get other people to engage with your work. And so the way this is structured is that you start by recording a video for the qualifying round of your 3-minute talk. And then if you are one of the top 10 selected from that qualifying round, you move on to the final round. And if you are the winner of the UC Davis final round, then you become one of the 10 competitors at the UC Championship, which has an even larger prize attached to it, and where there's one representative from each university. And so that's kind of a lot to prepare for. And I want to really highlight at this point is incredibly natural, expected, happens every time, that if you move through those different phases, you're going to make substantial changes, substantial improvements, hopefully, from stage to stage. So you should really think about this as an evolving process, not a thing that you have completely finished and ready to go for the qualifying round, and then there's no movement after that fact. You're just going to kind of continue to learn and get feedback on it. And the qualifying round has no prizes associated with it other than the publicity of becoming a finalist. Your video will be posted online and promoted widely. A lot of people have gotten a lot of I would say mileage out of being able to share that on their personal page or anything else like that. But once you become a finalist, there are cash prizes, both for kind of winning the competition at large, but also based on specific donor incentives. Yeah. Good question.
So after the qualifying round, you go here on the top 10. Do folks get any type of monetary prizes for being in the top 10, or they won't get that until they go through the final round?
Yeah, great. So the question is, do you get any cash prizes for making it to the top 10, or nothing until you compete in the final round? The answer is nothing until you compete in the final round. There's prizes for the top 3 finishers of that final round, as well as 2 sponsored prizes. So there's the Office of Public Scholarship and Engagement, provides a $500 prize for the finalist they believe best engages with public scholarship. And so, as I was saying, making your research accessible can be for different audiences. So they're really looking at that specifically. And then Global Education also provides a similar prize for the talk that best addresses issues of global significance. So in general, if you're working on, let's say, like a very small like computer science problem, it's going to be quite challenging to win the Global Education Prize. Whereas if you're working on access to clean drinking water around the world, they're going to have a lot more attention on that. And those are judged separately from the at-large competition. Yeah, so Exactly. So they'll have their own judges present who will make that determination. Usually, I don't think we've had any overlap other than last year, where the winner also won one of those prizes, but previously it's usually been like the 6th place finisher was the most relevant to the interest of one of those groups. So yeah, a lot of opportunities to kind of go away with something monetary, even if you don't end up winning that stage of the competition. And then at the UC-wide competition, again, the top 3 finishers receive a monetary prize. Everyone who competes in that competition historically has gone to San Francisco to LinkedIn headquarters to do the competition over a few days to meet other competitors there, network with the university, UCOP staff and representatives from all the other universities. So again, a pretty good opportunity to engage with people, even though, again, if you don't end up being in the top 3. So that's kind of what you're preparing for. But at the core of what we're trying to do is to, well, on one hand, we want UC Davis to look good, right? We want our competitors to be the best they can possibly be. But we also know that we're dedicating a lot of resources to this. And if it was just about the monetary prizes, we'd be dedicating a lot of resources for the benefit of about 8 to 12 people. So we want to make this as useful for as many people as possible. And so we're really focused on the training and preparation, not just for competing this year, but for taking forward as a professional skill. And also because many people who do win the competition are previous competitors from prior years. So frequently, the first time you do this isn't going to be as good as the second or third time. And so I would say at the base level, what I really recommend, and what we're encouraging everyone to do this year, is to go through kind of an introductory workshop series that will prepare you to give this type of research talk. And we're kind of working from the ground up. Welcome. So the first part of this is Rock the Talk Part 1. This is coming up on October 27th. And this is a training that is really focused on the nuts and bolts of standing up in front of a room and speaking to people. So it's overcoming your any anxiety you have around that, understanding how to present and project, and really starting to kind of craft, in this workshop, crafting a short talk that is probably not related to the talk you'll actually present at Grad Slam, just as an example of like, get used to giving, frankly, a very short talk to someone that still has a beginning, middle, and end. So, you know, in grad school, I think we're mostly used to rambling and like talking at length and on and on and on and having a lot of opportunities to clarify what we're saying. So this is going to be more of a model of, okay, we're just going to like introduce ourselves and hold ourselves to 3 minutes and know that we can't follow up on that at all. So how do I get it all in there in a really tight time frame? Following that, we have a workshop called Getting to the Point. And this is a workshop designed to help you look at the kind of totality of your research and understand where the hooks and anchors are to communicate to a broader audience. So what is significant about your research? What is kind of like the most intelligible analogy to the public's like broader experience? So I'm sure you've seen, you know, things like TED Talks and other ways that people like to engage people by referencing popular culture, or just like a shared experience that a lot of people have. And you can be working on, you know, something very granular and sophisticated about putting together a new molecule. And maybe the best analogy is about playing dodgeball in middle school. And so this workshop is really geared around, okay, what's the hook? How am I going to get people to use their pre-existing knowledge to engage with what I'm working on? And this is a very work-focused workshop, I would say. It's not really about giving you strategies, it's about giving you time. It's like, here's 90 minutes, tell me what your actual research is, and we will brainstorm the different hooks and actually leave with, okay, my plan for my talk is, it's gonna be 3 minutes about how my research is like playing dodgeball, or something like that you can actually take to the competition. Rock the Talk Part 2 is really getting into the refined elements of your talk now. So Rock the Talk Part 1 was more about how do I just like get up and do something in a short time frame, getting to the point. It's very much about, okay, my specific research, what am I going to talk about? How am I going to present it? Rock the Talk Part 2 will help you kind of really polish the edges of that and say, okay, if I'm talking about it in this way, how do I make sure it has like a compelling narrative arc? How do I know that this is going to engage with people emotionally? Because that will engage with them intellectually and help them remember things. So now that I kind of have a broad plan, I know what the subject matter is, how do I actually present that in the best possible way? And so that's the workshop model that runs through kind of mid-January that we're going to push everyone through. And hopefully that gets you kind of from like a mess of ideas to like more of a clean, direct, again, 3 minutes, very short, straight line. And things that you'll be thinking about in putting this together are best captured by the judging criteria, because that's how you're going to be evaluated. And so number one is clarity. And I would say this is the most important criterion because you won't be able to succeed in any of the others without clarity. Basically, it doesn't matter how significant your work is if the judges don't understand what was presented. So you should be focusing on clarity first. I would say almost to the detriment of all other categories. Second is organization. So the judges are going to be evaluating that narrative arc. Does it make sense that your talk was presented the way that it was? Spoilers, traditional kind of research paper order of like, abstract through problem statement, methodology, like that is not going to be a good organization for 3 minutes, especially if you do want to share your methodology. People need to know what actually came from it in order to process that. So you're going to have to really reorganize things. Then you'll be evaluated on your delivery. And so this is, again, going back to Rock the Talk Part 1, really about like, do you appear confident and prepared presenting in front of a group? Okay, they're going to be evaluating, pace, enthusiasm, vocal range. I like to highlight this. This is basically the idea that you are using your voice as a tool to highlight certain things and maybe run through other things more quietly, and like using that as an actual way of engaging your audience and not just kind of saying, I talk the way I talk. Again, because for 3 minutes, it's really hard to draw someone's attention to something. Volume and intonation can play a big role in that. There is a visual component to the competition. This is not fully decided this year as far as like the exact format and specifications of this, but I will say at this point, what you should expect from previous years is a single slide. That slide is going to be judged on whether or not it makes your talk more engaging and easier to understand, is positive. Distracting, confusing, or attention grabbing would be a negative. So oftentimes people put a lot of energy into the slide and they want it to look amazing and they want people to like get in there and really engage with it. That's actually going to count against you in the competition because the focus is supposed to be on you giving the talk, not on the visual. So the visual is really just going to be about like, does that supplement your talk? The best visuals are the one where the audience kind of looks like it goes, I get it, and then turns right back to you. Appropriateness is I would say, belaboredly named category. This is more about being judged on whether or not it was appropriate for a broad public audience. So was this described in a way where maybe not even literally the people in the room can understand it, but they can imagine other people in a wide variety of other people being able to understand it. We frequently had, for example, like a high school student from like a school newspaper present. Was it communicated in a way that was appropriate for them to not feel talked down to, but still able to understand everything you said, in addition to like the tenured faculty that are in the room? So this can be like a real challenge in terms of broad appeal. And then finally, intellectual significance, and I save it for last because I really do think this is one of the least important categories, mostly because when I look at the scores, they tend to be pretty flat, so it's pretty hard to distinguish yourself here. Basically, you'll get dinged if you don't explain why your work matters. And it doesn't have to change the world. You don't have to save the world from an asteroid or the next pandemic, but you should clearly identify who does this matter to and why does it matter to them. Oh, sorry. And overall, I would say when thinking about all of these categories, you're thinking in terms of how you're engaging your audience on them, not saying, well, this sentence in my speech addressed that thing, so I should get full credit for it, because again, it's kind of a presentational competition. So don't think in terms of like, I checked that box off, so I should get kind of full marks for it. You're going to be judged on like, how engaging was that piece? How memorable was that piece? So again, don't just try to make sure you're doing something where you can justify to yourself that you're doing these things. It's how can I maximize each of these individual things? So that's kind of a lot to focus on, and it's probably a impossible or at least very painful task to try to sit down with nothing and write your way into excelling in all of those areas. And so the structure that you should go through is a lot of practice after those introductory workshops. So those introductory workshops are like, okay, now I have some material to actually work with. I've done kind of the 3 big elements of preparing that, and then plan to practice regularly. We are providing some scheduled practice sessions for 2 pieces of utility. One, if you're like me, this will get you to actually do it, because there's an excuse to do it at a place and a time rather than trying to wait for it to raise to like a high enough priority around everything else. We are also finding this is a really useful tool if you have a major professor, supervisor, PI, who you want to take time away from the other things that you're doing in order to do this. This gives you an excuse to share something with them. It's like, oh, I need to go do this now because it's scheduled at this particular place at the particular time. So we heard that feedback in previous years that in order to carve out time for this, it's helpful for it to be formalized. So here we go, formal practice sessions. Nature of those practice sessions are going to be mostly getting peer feedback, because we anticipate a number of competitors and probably 1 or 2 facilitators. So you'll have an opportunity to get help and support from the facilitator during the practice session, but you'll get more out of it if you come prepared to solicit and provide input with your peers there at the same time. As you see, these are 90 minutes long, so maybe you'll get direct feedback from a facilitator for like 5 or 10 minutes of that time, depending on how many people are there, but you can still use the rest of the time to work with others there, kind of brainstorm ideas, refine these things. And I would say best use of this is to bring questions. Like, okay, I'm saying it like this, or I have 2 versions of it. Can you tell me how those hit you and which one feels better? Especially since I think you'll find people who are also graduate students, but in completely opposite fields, are oftentimes the best judges of how accessible your presentation is, typically because they're used to knowing things really, really well. So they're good like self-judges of whether or not they don't get it yet. All right, so for the video submission in the qualifying round, depending on your temperament, personality, preferences, this is either way better or way worse than the idea of standing up in front of a group of people. Important things to note about this is we're looking for 3-minute continuous videos. So it's not about your video editing skills and your ability to cut things together. In fact, we tend to be really lenient on things like cropping. So like if you send us a 3-minute and 15-second video, but you didn't actually start talking until 3 minutes and 7 seconds, we'll be pretty generous about that. Again, we're really just looking to make it easy for people to compete by letting them record on their own time in their own space. We're not looking to create an additional technological barrier. And so single unedited take, and you shouldn't be using editing software to do anything other than cropping. I've heard from past competitors, some of them have liked to do something like, I'm going to set up the recording and I record for half an hour and just give the talk over and over again and then crop out the one I like best. Perfectly fine. You can do that kind of crop. What you can't do is take the first half of this one that I really like and stick it to the back half of this other one that I really like. When it comes to the live competition, and this also applies to the video competition, but I would say since you can watch your own video, there's no excuse to get penalized. Just do it again until it works. There's penalties for going over time. There's no penalty for going under time. So a lot of the winning talks historically have been about 2 minutes and 50 seconds, 2 minutes, 55 seconds, because the risk of going over is great and there's no risk to going under. So you get penalized every few seconds that you go over. You'll have a giant clock in front of you while competing. So oftentimes, even if you haven't finished what you want to say, if you see it hit, 3:01, just stop talking. I want to put this up again because I wanted to reinforce the point, circle back to you should improve through every iteration. In 2018, UC Davis competitor won the competition at large among all the UCs. And on the left was their slide from the qualifying round. And on the right is the slide that they won the competition with. So you can see a pretty dramatic difference. And again, I want to encourage people to think about it like it's an evolving process. You can present that slide and it won't be a great slide and you might advance to the next round and you still have a chance to really turn it around. And again, hopefully you can see what I mentioned before, whereas like this slide of strong corn plant, I look at it, I go, I get it. And then I go back to the speaker, whereas this slide, I spend 2 of the 3 minutes trying to read the text and understand what that actually means. All right, your judges during the qualifying round are slightly different from your judges during the final round, but you should be kind of not really changing what you're aiming for because we're asking our qualifying round judges to basically pretend they represent the final round judges. So qualifying round is typically faculty and staff from the university because they're the people available to volunteer and judge a bunch of qualifying round videos, but they are going to pretend that they are not faculty and staff from our own university. They're going to pretend that they're judging from the perspective of a general member of the public. And we will do everything we can to avoid having people, basically, no one from your department or neighboring department or potential collaborator should be judging your video. So we will be looking you up in our system, seeing all the departments that you're affiliated with. And, if you're, let's say, a social scientist, we're going to look for, someone in like medicine to judge your video and vice versa. So we're going to do our best with that. We are limited by the volunteers that we have available. And some of you sometimes are just really all over campus. You're in a billion different committees in a billion different departments. And sometimes we just can't get 3 judges that have no connection whatsoever. So we'll do our best to get as much distance as possible. But we have never had to allow a conflict of interest like a faculty advisor judging one of their advisees, or even knowing that their advisee is competing necessarily. That would be not great. All right, some rules and eligibility questions that are pretty common, wanted to address. You have to be currently enrolled in a master's or doctoral graduate program for the entirety of the competition to be eligible to compete. So qualifying rounds in February. If you're going to graduate in March, you're not eligible to compete because the UC final won't be until April. So you just have to be registered through that entire time span. Similarly, no one who is enrolling after February 17th is eligible to compete. They can compete in the following year. But this includes the professional programs, which aren't overseen by grad studies specifically. So people from the law school, MBA programs, veterinary medicine, and so on. If you've participated before, can you enter again? Yes, as I mentioned up top, oftentimes the most successful competitors are people who have participated before. We encourage it strongly. The only exception is if you have won the UC Davis, if you've been the representative from UC Davis, then you are not eligible for prizes. You can still participate in the training and compete if you really want to, but we are not going to give you a second first prize. And then as far as what research to present, and this is something that we'll cover in even more detail during the Getting to the Point workshop, is the research must be your research from UC Davis. So that's it for a requirement. And so you can think very creatively about how to construe things in that way. If you are working on research that started at another institution, but you are still working on it now, that's fair game. If it's research that you plan to do at UC Davis and you've spoken with your advisor, you're like, this is the plan, I just haven't started it yet, that is also fair game. If you're one of 50 people working on a research project here at UC Davis, you're one of them, that's fair game. The only thing you can't do is kind of say like, oh, well, here's something really cool that Neil deGrasse Tyson or Brian Greene worked on, and I want to talk about that. It's not allowed. Or, you know, work that you did to completion somewhere else, changed fields, and then came here. Can't talk about your previous work. It all has to be things that are currently ongoing here on this campus. If you are collaborating with others, it is really, really important, not so much as like a rule of the competition, but just in order to get a good score in the competition, to clarify what you do versus what your collaborators do. Because oftentimes if you kind of exaggerate, you're like, this is just what we work on, it ends up sounding like unbelievable. How could one person do all of that? Or how could one person think that they could like try to do all of that? So really isolate, like, this is my piece of it. Oftentimes, if your judges can like envision what you're doing day to day, even if it's like, I go to this computer terminal, sit down and type for 4 hours and then go do this other thing, like that's going to be much more believable. It's going to connect with them more. They're going to be able to envision what your life is like rather than, well, we get data from CERN and then 500 of us start like really crunching the numbers. It's going to be hard for them to process and empathize with that sort of work. Things like embedded audio and video, you should not plan to use. But if this seems like a major barrier for you, for example, maybe you're working in musicology and your research is about a particular sound or sequence of sounds, you can get an exception to include this in your presentation. But the default is, unless you can identify why it is absolutely necessary, no embedded audio or video is going to be allowed. So basically the organizing committee has to approve that. Similarly for props, props are allowed. We're a little more open to people bringing props. However, there's just the logistical constraints of that. So like if they're going to interfere with our transition to the next competitor because they require a lot of cleanup, if it is the kind of thing that we're not, frankly, approved by the fire marshal to have in this space, that won't be approved either. But if it is, you know, absolutely necessary, those can get cleared. But again, don't plan to have, you know, a 5th grade like science fair volcano as part of your presentation. All right, so next steps. You will sign up to compete at grad.ucdavis.edu/gradslam. That's also where you'll get all updates, information. You'll find the email address. You can ask questions. Everything will be put up there as quickly as our staff is able to get it up there. For example, the recording of this presentation will be available at that website. If you have any more thoughts about, like, maybe you're deciding whether or not to even pursue this, trying to really envision what this looks like, I recommend going to the Grad Studies YouTube channel and watching some of the talks from previous years, both because they're just super cool and it's fun to hear about other people's research, and also because they're super short. They're 3 minutes. You can get an idea of what a winning competitor's presentation looks like and whether or not that's something that you want to work towards. But the main next step is to register and attend Rock the Talk on October 27th, which I believe is in this room. and to get started on that entire training stream that we talked about. All right, and so as promised, actually, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.